I'm sure he has, a staff of doctors and people, but I mean, repeating the same thing twice and expecting different results.
Medical clearance alone will not make Carlos Alcaraz's Cincinnati comeback safe. The real danger hides beyond the scan. It waits inside one savage rally, one desperate sprint, one violent stop, one improvised forehand. Andre Agassi sees the warning signs from a different angle. He warns Alcaraz without claiming the wrist remains damaged. His concern is sharper. Alcaraz's greatest weapon now carries his deepest risk. That is the movement problem. His legs look explosive. His timing looks clean. Yet the injured wrist must still survive chaos. It must react at full speed. It must trust every stretched position. That final response is what his doctors cannot measure before real pressure arrives. Since Barcelona, Alcaraz has missed Madrid, Rome, Roland Garros, Queens, and Wimbledon. Cincinnati now stands as the first serious test. The US Open waits immediately after it. Agassi once praised Alcaraz's movement as almost unnatural. Now that same gift carries the biggest question of his season. Every rival will attack it until the answer becomes undeniable under the fiercest match pressure imaginable. Subscribe now because one hidden hesitation threatens to change the entire comeback. Next, we reveal why Agassi's concern has turned Alcaraz's greatest strength into his most dangerous test. That concern begins with a distinction many viewers will miss. Agassi never said Alcaraz had forgotten how to move. He never accused the medical team of overlooking damage. His concern came from the silence surrounding the wrist and the danger of judging a comeback from training clips. Public discussion grew from withdrawals, entry lists, and hopeful reports. Only Alcaraz and his specialists knew how the joint responded under serious load. That information gap created the perfect place for confidence, doubt, and rivalry to collide. Agassi's comments carried weight because he understands the difference between ordinary movement and elite movement. Earlier, he praised Alcaraz for carrying his speed across surfaces with almost no visible hesitation. Clay rewards sliding. Grass punishes careless braking. Hard courts demand sharp recovery under repeated impact. Most players adjust when the surface changes. Alcaraz often looks untouched by those limits. He reaches difficult balls early, recovers aggressively, and turns defense into attack before an opponent resets. Agassi saw that freedom as one of the Spaniard's defining advantages. That praise now creates the tension around this comeback. Alcaraz does not rely only on balanced positions. His best tennis often appears when balance has nearly disappeared. He arrives stretched, plants late, rotates from an awkward angle, and still produces pace. Those shots demand full coordination through the shoulder, forearm, wrist, and racket. Any hesitation inside that chain changes the ball. The shot lands shorter, the direction becomes safer, the opponent gains time. This is where the title becomes real without turning into fiction. The movement problem is not poor footwork. It is the connection between explosive movement and total trust in the racket hand. Doctors test pain, strength, motion, and load tolerance. Coaches raise the intensity of drills. Practice partners increase pace and depth. None of that reproduces a breakpoint when the return lands deep, the court opens suddenly, and Alcaraz must strike without protecting the wrist. The injury first became serious in Barcelona. Alcaraz completed his opening match, but further testing showed that caution was necessary. He withdrew before the next round. The consequences spread across the calendar. Madrid disappeared, Rome followed. Roland Garros vanished from the schedule. Queens and Wimbledon were later removed as the recovery continued. Every absence increased the pressure because each missed event changed the competitive picture. Those decisions also showed that the team refused to chase an early return for appearance's sake. Alcaraz has spoken about wanting a long career. That priority matters here. A rushed comeback sometimes produces one acceptable week and months of trouble afterward. Pain alters mechanics, protection becomes habitual, compensation moves stress into another area. Patience looks frustrating during a major tournament, yet it protects more than a single result. Agassi understood that logic. His public concern was not a demand for Alcaraz to return quickly. It was almost the opposite. He wanted greater clarity, Because silence forced everyone to guess. He mentioned possible risk conditions only to illustrate the range of uncertainty. Those possibilities were not diagnoses. The central point remained uncertainty. Without a clear explanation, nobody outside the camp knew whether the absence involved inflammation, structural damage, nerve irritation, or another problem requiring time. That uncertainty matters because tennis fans have seen wrist injuries alter major careers. Juan Martín del Potro endured repeated wrist surgeries. Dominic Thiem struggled to recover the forehand authority that once defined his game after a separate wrist injury. Their experiences explain the anxiety, but they do not predict Alcaraz's future. Different structures suffer different damage. Treatment plans vary. Recovery depends on diagnosis, severity, response to loading, and the demands of each player's technique. Using those careers as a forecast creates drama without accuracy. Alcaraz also generates his forehand differently from many players. His acceleration often arrives late, especially during defense or a sudden change of direction. That ability gives him options from compromised positions, yet it also places the wrist inside highly dynamic situations. Movement itself does not damage the joint. The question is whether he performs those actions without guarding it. A cautious version of Alcaraz still produces strong tennis. It does not explain why he belongs near the top. The team's limited disclosure is not proof of a setback. Players protect medical privacy. They also avoid giving rivals unnecessary information. Public statements remain broad while rehabilitation changes from week to week. Agassi's request for clarity made sense, but the team owed nobody a complete medical file. That tension between privacy and public curiosity strengthens the story. Fans want certainty, the camp wants control. The court eventually decides which side understood the situation better. Until then, every encouraging clip remains incomplete evidence. The decisive proof begins when an opponent forces Alcaraz into movements he cannot rehearse, choose, or avoid. That makes Cincinnati more than a normal comeback event. It becomes the first public test. Training shows rhythm, competition exposes reaction. A practice session allows a player to stop when discomfort appears. A match gives the opponent control over the next demand. The ball arrives high, low, late, or heavy. A defender gets dragged beyond the double's alley. A serve jams the body. A forehand must come from a poor base. Those moments reveal trust faster than any interview. Alcaraz's rivals will understand that immediately. They do not need private medical information. They test the wrist through patterns. Heavy topspin pushes the contact point higher. Deep returns hurry the first forehand. Wide serves force stretched responses. Backhand pressure encourages him to run around the ball from an uncomfortable position. Nobody needs to target an injury recklessly. Normal elite tactics answer the question. This is where Sinner becomes important. His clean timing and early ball striking remove preparation time. Against him, Alcaraz needs explosive changes of direction because the ball reaches dangerous areas quickly. Any thought about the wrist interrupts that response. Sinner's pace magnifies hesitation. The problem does not always appear as visible pain. It often shows through conservative targets, reduced acceleration, or reluctance to improvise. Djokovic presents a different examination. He extends rallies until movement patterns become predictable. He redirects pace, changes height, and exposes impatience. Even full physical strength leaves Alcaraz facing a psychological battle against that kind of control. One awkward defensive forehand brings the wrist back into his thoughts. Once attention moves toward protection, instinct loses space. The danger therefore sits between medical clearance and competitive freedom. Those states are not identical. Clearance means the player has met the standards established by his team. Competitive freedom means the body reacts without negotiation. Elite tennis moves too quickly for conscious permission. Alcaraz cannot pause before each stretched forehand and decide whether the wrist feels safe. The answer must already exist inside the movement. That is the hidden problem doctors do not fully settle before competition. The phrase should not be treated as criticism. Of medicine, specialists evaluate far more than fans see. They understand tissue healing, strength deficits, workload progression, and warning signs. Their work makes the return possible. The remaining uncertainty belongs to competition itself. A scan does not reproduce the emotional weight of a deciding set. Controlled drills do not match the urgency of a breakpoint at the US Open. Agassi's earlier description of Alcaraz now sounds important for another reason. He admired the Spaniard's lack of visible caution. Alcaraz moved across surfaces with unusual belief. That belief allowed him to attack balls other players simply retrieved. It also helped him recover from positions that should have ended the point. If the wrist injury adds even a small layer of calculation, the entire style changes without any dramatic loss of speed. Fans often miss the first signs. A highlight package hides them. One spectacular winner creates the impression that everything has returned. The deeper evidence appears across repeated points. Watch what happens after a hard stop. Notice whether the forehand accelerates from a stretched position. Study the serve late in a long set. Observe whether Alcaraz chases the uncomfortable ball when the score tightens. Those details matter more than one fast shot. His team will judge the comeback through accumulation. A single session proves little. One isolated match proves only slightly more. The wrist must survive repeated days, changing opponents, and rising intensity. A tournament creates stress that training never duplicates because recovery time becomes part of the challenge. The joint sometimes feels strong on day one and reacts differently after several rounds. Entry into Cincinnati therefore represents intent, not complete proof. The timing adds another layer. Cincinnati sits close to the US Open. Success restores confidence quickly. A setback damages preparation. Even a small reaction forces difficult choices. Alcaraz needs matches, but every extra match adds load. He needs rhythm, yet chasing rhythm too aggressively threatens New York. The team must balance competitive need against physical caution without knowing exactly how the wrist responds after several demanding rounds. That balance becomes harder because Alcaraz's ambitions are not modest. He is not returning merely to participate. His standard is championship tennis. A controlled comeback satisfies another player, but his game invites constant comparison with Sinner, Djokovic, and every major contender. Fans examine every result as evidence. Opponents study every pattern. The media turns each grimace into a medical theory. That atmosphere makes patience look like weakness even when it remains the smartest strategy. Agassi's concern therefore works best as a challenge to false certainty. A positive training week does not settle the story, a clean update does not settle it. Even a comfortable opening match leaves major questions. The answer emerges when Alcaraz faces the exact situations that made his movement extraordinary before the injury. The comeback must survive chaos, not preparation. There is also a mental dimension that cannot be separated from the wrist. Pain leaves memory. Even after tissue heals, the brain remembers the movement linked to discomfort. Players sometimes protect an area without making a conscious choice. The racket path shortens, the grip tightens, the body avoids one position by arriving differently. These adjustments look tiny, but elite opponents operate inside tiny margins. Alcaraz's personality offers an advantage. He plays with visible emotion and often embraces physical challenges. His willingness to improvise gives confidence a path back once the wrist proves reliable. Agassi even suggested that the absence would make him more appreciative and more dangerous on return. Time away sharpens hunger. It also offers space for technical adjustments that reduce unnecessary stress. That optimistic possibility deserves attention, because the title should provoke interest without pretending disaster is inevitable. The movement issue is not automatically a lasting limitation. Cincinnati may show that the wrist is ready and that Alcaraz's instincts remain untouched. A successful return brings better control, smarter shot selection, and stronger motivation. The same injury that created doubt also offers a path toward a more sustainable version of his game. Optimism, however, does not replace evidence. The first real evidence appears after difficult contact. Clues show up after a late forehand, during the recovery step following a hard slide, or through the decision to attack rather than retreat into safer patterns. Those moments reveal more than a speed gun, a photograph, or a short practice clip. There is another layer that strengthens Agassi's warning. Alcaraz's movement has always protected his shot making. His speed buys time, while his balance allows late decisions. After a wrist injury, that relationship becomes fragile. Arriving early means little if the racket hand holds back. Reaching a wide ball means little if the follow-through stops short. The body wins the race to the ball and still loses the exchange when the final action lacks conviction. That is why the comeback should not be judged by running speed alone. The true test begins when movement creates an ugly contact point. Alcaraz built his reputation by solving those moments with creativity and aggression. A safer response changes his identity on court. Rivals gain time, rallies become more predictable, and his defensive brilliance loses its attacking edge. The difference between recovery and restoration sits inside that final fraction of commitment under pressure against the very best opponents. The real story is larger than the wrist itself. It concerns the relationship between health, trust, and identity. Alcaraz built his reputation through fearless movement. Agassi recognized that quality before the injury interrupted the season. The comeback now has to prove that the same freedom survives when the stakes rise and the body is asked to forget months of caution. Cincinnati will provide the first answer without making it final. New York raises the intensity. Long matches increase the load. Elite opponents search for discomfort. The question follows Alcaraz until he survives enough pressure to make it disappear. That is the movement problem hiding beneath the medical story. Fearless movement makes the warning fade. Visible hesitation shifts the entire US Open race. Either result matters because Alcaraz is not simply returning from an injury. He is trying to recover the instinct that made his movement look impossible. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications because every match in this comeback will clearly reveal another part of the truth. Then tell us in the comments whether Alcaraz returns completely free or whether the wrist changes the way he attacks the court.